What is good? Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be talking about making prints. I recently shot a roll of expired Fuji 160. Not exactly sure from when, but the problem was I actually underexposed it accidentally as well. I just wasn't paying attention. So when I did the scan, which you can see right here, I got some very interesting results. It has a very cool film look, obviously, but a lot of degradation, a lot of extra noise, let's say, from the scan, and of course the grain. And the colors are off a bit as well. So I figured, you know what? Let's jump into the darkroom and see what this looks like if I actually try to print it. How big of a difference will it be between the scan and the print? Will it have some better results? What kind of colors will you get? So I went and jumped in the darkroom and I got after it. Let's check it out. Real quick, I've got an entire playlist right here about printing. So if you want to learn more about printing in the darkroom color images, click on that playlist right here so you can check out all of the other videos that I have about printing in the darkroom. So of course, the first thing I did was actually get my temperature, my chemicals up. So I don't measure the temperature on the chemicals too aggressively. I basically just get them hot. I use the hottest water possible to get them hot in a water bath, and then I turn off the water. And typically for the next 45 minutes or so, the developer will be hot enough to get my prints developed. And then the Blix basically doesn't really matter too much how the temperature is. And that's been my experience. If you're trying to get extremely repeatable results over and over again, like if you're making many copies of a print, then you probably should do it more precisely than I do. But if you're just doing one-off prints every single time, I think it's okay for you to just get your chemicals warm and not really fuss too much about how hot they exactly are. That's just me, I'm not a perfectionist. So I was examining my negatives here. I was just double checking to see exactly what the negative looked like, see how much kind of density there was in the negative. And of course, this one was underexposed. And because it was underexposed, that means it wasn't that dense, which meant that the exposure time with the enlarger was probably gonna be pretty fast because, the less dense the negative is, the easier the light can pass through it. So you don't really need too much light, and you also don't need too much time. There's a 6x7 print, so I'm putting it here in the 6x7 holder. I kind of align it, make sure it's appropriate, and then you just hit it with the blower and get any dust off. And this is my enlarger, the Jobo LPL C7700, I believe. I'm not exactly sure, but I probably should have looked it up before recording this. And very simply put your negative in there, and then you turn on your enlarger, and at this point you actually start to align the baseboard and get your image where you want it. And of course, you also need to focus your image. Focusing is done with the little focus finder, and basically you look through it and you keep adjusting the focus knobs on the enlarger until you see the grain on the film. Depends what film you use, because some film has finer grain, which is harder to see, and then some film like 400 speed or higher typically has very well-defined grain, which is very easy to see. So you just use that to kind of get your bearings, and as soon as you can see the grain through the focus finder, then you got the focus right. All right, so it's now time to make some development strips, and basically I did 6 strips here, each with different settings, and you won't see it in the video here, but I basically, I'll do one test exposure, put the actual print in my light tight canister, cover it, turn the lights on, change the exposure or change the color settings on the enlarger, lights off, do another print, and then repeat that process over and over again. And I do that 6 times. Usually I only do it 3 times because I typically know where I want to set my enlarger to start, but with this print, because it was expired film, I figured let's do 6 total exposure tests to see where we land with color, because I really had no expectations. All right, so here are the 6 test strips that I did. As you can see, there's some pretty interesting results across the board. The leftmost test print was done with the settings that are filtering out the least amount of magenta and yellow. And then the one all the way on the right is filtering out the most magenta and yellow of all the strips that I did. And ultimately, I think I like the ones that are basically leaning towards the right here. The ones where you have the 80 and 80 and the 90 and 90. I think those gave me the best kind of starting point. And then from there, the goal is to basically tweak and find something that I like that I think looks good across the entire print. So I'm gonna use these settings, and I'm gonna go ahead and make another test print now, testing for the actual exposure time. As you can see here, basically I have 2 different exposure times. We got 5 seconds, and then we have 7 seconds. And this is total time. So the difference between the 2 is 2 seconds. And basically, I think I like the more exposed print, the 7-second one, but even that could use maybe another second. So in a follow-up print after this, I'll probably add a second as well. But ultimately, I kind of like where the colors were. At the time here, I didn't think it was too green. So I went ahead and made one final print with these settings at the 7-second mark to get me my first final print. As As you can see here, I'm pulling the print out of the tank, and there it is. I really like how it looked at this point, and I thought it was cool, but as I started to look at it a bit more and I kind of used a daylight balance light to look at it more closely, I decided that I didn't like the color as much potentially, so I was gonna add more magenta to the print and leave the yellow where it was, and then see how that compared. So I changed my exposure settings to 80 magenta and 90 yellow, and then I went with that to see exactly what it gave me. And this is the result of the print. It's actually, you know, a bit more noticeably magenta, of course, because I allowed more magenta in the exposure. And at this point, I'm not sure which one I prefer. You kind of have to look at them side by side in order to really appreciate the difference between the two. So I actually have both prints right here. And I actually did a poll on Instagram yesterday to see, you know, which one people preferred. But basically, between these two right here, we've got the greener one here and the magenta more one here. On Instagram, at least 75% of people actually preferred this one right here, the magenta one, whereas 25% preferred the kind of more green one. I think I like the more green one a bit more, but I'm still torn between the two. I think people like this one more right here, the magenta one, because of the fact that it appears to have more contrast. And as you add that magenta in, the greens in the background start to get a bit more dimension, and of course the skin starts to get just a bit better as well. I think that adds a bit more dynamic look to the image, but this green one just looks very interesting to me. And I think it probably looks more like what I remember, because this was daylight, it was overcast, and it was also in a very green area. Whereas this one kind of gives me like late light vibes, you know, approaching sunset, maybe the shadow side of golden hour or something like that. So it's kind of hard to tell which one I prefer, but honestly, I like them both. So I'm glad I decided to print both, because I've always sort of been wondering, like, what if I change the settings? And, you know, I did, so here it is. Ultimately, it's good when you're printing to really experiment. I try nowadays to never assume that the print that I made is the correct one. A, because there is no right answer when it comes to printing. It requires interpretation. That's the entire process. But B, even if you create one thing now that you like, and then you create something else, you know, of the same exact image, you know, 2 weeks later, you might have very different results because you liked one better one week, and then the next week you had a different flavor. So it is good to, when you're making prints, to make your final version and maybe make a slightly different one as well, just to see if that changes anything for you. I know in this case, it definitely opened my eyes and made me appreciate the image more, but also see it from a different lens. So I think that's a really good exercise to do with color printing. So talk to me in the comments, which one do you prefer? Do you like the more green one or the more magenta one? I'll put it up on the screen here so you can take a look again, but I'm just curious if the opinions here will differ that much from what I saw on Instagram. All right, y'all, that's the video for this week. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and like, and of course, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. Till the next video, y'all, I'm out.